So my name is Martez Reed, Director of Technical Marketing
with Morpheus Data. And in this session, we'll walk through self-service Terraform from a Morpheus standpoint. So before we delve into the specifics of self-service Terraform, let's go ahead and take a quick overview over the Morpheus platform itself and the capabilities it offers. So the Morpheus platform really focuses on three core areas from a capability standpoint: workload lifecycle management, being able to help facilitate the automated end-to-end provisioning of workloads, utilizing the platform for automation and orchestration. So being able to execute automation like Ansible playbooks, Python scripts, PowerShell scripts as part of the execution or the lifecycle of a workload, as well as in an ad hoc or a scheduled fashion. And then finally, costing and analytics from a platform standpoint. So being able to get visibility into things like cloud spend, both on-prem as well as public cloud. All right, so let's delve into a couple of the aspects of Terraform provisioning, both in the context of Morpheus, as well as just in general from a Terraform standpoint. So one of the common patterns that we see is utilizing CI/CD pipelines to provision or deploy infrastructure utilizing Terraform. So what we see here is utilizing source control as the trigger or mechanism by which a pipeline is facilitated. And so that then feeds into the CI/CD pipeline, which pulls down the code from the Git repository and then proceeds to execute the various tasks associated with deploying the infrastructure. In this particular case, we're looking at utilizing open source Terraform as part of a deployment process to stand up the infrastructure. So in this example, you stand up the AWS VPC, the subnet, as well as the EC2 instance, and then finally also utilizing a configuration management tool like Ansible in order to be able to actually configure the operating system, as well as oftentimes utilize it for deployment of applications as part of the provisioning process. One of the challenges with this paradigm or this model is that the ability to be able to scale this type of model across an enterprise organization becomes very challenging. And the reason it becomes very challenging is often the idea that individuals outside of the core Terraform team, or oftentimes those that may not necessarily have in-depth DevOps skills, so to speak, would then need to be able to create new CI/CD pipelines when they wanted to stand up new infrastructure as part of the process. So an example would be if I needed to stand up a QA or a dev version of this stack, or if, let's say, I have multiple individuals within my team, let's say I have 4 or 5 individuals, the question becomes, how can I enable them to each stand up their own stack or environment for testing purposes? And so that becomes very challenging utilizing the existing model from a CI/CD pipeline standpoint. So at that point, you then get to needing to deploy or develop 5 or 6 different types of models. And so that's where, or pipelines, so to speak, excuse me. And so that's where it starts to become a little bit cumbersome in order to be able to enable those to be able to deploy their own infrastructure. And so one of the patterns that we see more and more from organizations is being able to need that self-service capability. So how can I come as a consumer, whether I'm a data engineer, whoever I might be within the organization? Oftentimes it's those that aren't most familiar with the Terraform and a lot of the practices related to utilizing the CI/CD pipelines from a Terraform provisioning or deployment standpoint. And so how can I enable the broader organization to consume this functionality? And so that's where Morpheus really looks to provide the additional value to our consumers, in which what we see here is utilizing ServiceNow as the front end. That's a common pattern that we see from a lot of our customers and conversations that we have around consumption of Terraform at enterprise scale. So ServiceNow being the front end portal to the given environment. So all IT requests going through ServiceNow. And then in our case, utilizing or leveraging the Morpheus platform for essentially the orchestration component. And so really delivering that self-service capability. There's also the possibility to utilize self-service catalog item within the Morpheus platform without ServiceNow, but ServiceNow is certainly a common pattern we see from an IT request standpoint. And then Morpheus enables the orchestration or the trigger of the Terraform open source for provisioning of the cloud resources, the VPC, the subnet, as well as the EC2 instance. And then finally leveraging it in tandem with Ansible to be able to perform that OS level configuration from a solution standpoint. And so really this enables those across enterprise organizations to be able to easily consume the resources that they need. Really the focus being on what's the desired outcome more so than the underlying technology that underpins the actual request. So as an example, if there was a desire to move from Terraform to CloudFormation or ARM template, or move from CloudFormation to Terraform, there's the capability with this abstraction functionality to be able to essentially expose the desired outcome to the consumer, and then the underlying technology can be mixed and matched and swapped out without great concern for the user impact or the user experience from a consumption standpoint. So now let's take a look at what this might look like from a Morpheus standpoint and take a quick example where we'll walk through the constructs from a Morpheus standpoint and how those all come together to be able to enable a self-service Terraform solution. So the example we see here is the EC2 instance as well as a DynamoDB table. In this example, we're assuming that the AWS account already exists, the VPC already exists, and the subnet already exists. Technically, the VPC as well as the subnet can be created as part of this same deployment. Technically, an AWS account could also be created utilizing Terraform through Morpheus. But in this example, as I mentioned, we're going to assume that those constructs have already been created. But certainly Morpheus provides the functionality and capability in tandem with the platform to be able to deploy the broader constructs or the higher level constructs. And so from a logical design perspective, there's certainly a couple of ways this could be enabled within the Morpheus platform. But in this example, we're going to look at utilizing what are known as Terraform instance types. And so in addition to that, the example that we see here could utilize something in reference to two Terraform modules. So an example would be is having two Terraform modules, each one in a separate repository. And what I could do is I could reference those two Terraform modules as part of my Terraform instance declaration. And so that provides me the capability to be able to bring in existing content and collateral from a module standpoint, and then be able to ingest those from a functional standpoint. So now that we've got a sense of the logical design architecture, let's take a look at what those Morpheus building blocks would look like from a lower level perspective. And so what I'll actually do is I will dive into the Morpheus UI. So let me bring over my Morpheus UI to this window. And so I have an existing catalog item that I've created, and we're going to walk through decomposing what that looks like and how it maps or could map to our broader example. So one of the things I'll do is I'll start actually in ServiceNow, so we can take a look at what that functionality, that capability looks like, and we'll talk through some of the specifics of that. So one thing to note is that the Morpheus platform does provide an integration, as I mentioned, with ServiceNow. And so the functionality that offers is the ability to be able to expose catalog items in Morpheus through the ServiceNow interface. And so in this case, we see that we're in ServiceNow. We see that there is a Morpheus section in the service catalog. So these are actually existing Morpheus catalog items that have been brought into the ServiceNow UI. And so that provides a really great capability of dynamically pulling in items without having to go through the process of creating these items manually from a ServiceNow standpoint. And so the ServiceNow app can be added to, the Morpheus app can be added from the ServiceNow app store and then brought into your ServiceNow instance. The application is free, so certainly a great thing to be able to benefit from if the ServiceNow integration is something that is beneficial and desired. So in this case, we have our TF example application that we've brought in. And so what we see here is I have one input to the catalog item. Wanted to keep it pretty simple to ensure that we're not getting into some more deeply complex constructs to confuse. So in this case, we have cost center as an item that's being exposed, or an input that's being exposed to the end consumer. And so in this case, I would look up the given item. And so in this case, I have a couple of options. And so one thing to note is that these options are being provided via Morpheus. So these actually map to options that would be exposed to the end consumer or the end user via Morpheus's service catalog. So essentially, we're syncing these items into ServiceNow. So I could specify the given cost center, and then I would click order now, and then it would go through the process of provisioning. What would happen is it would reach out to Morpheus and then start the provisioning of that given item. So certainly a really beneficial capability. And we'll take a look on the Morpheus side to see how that integration is being facilitated. And so under administration integrations, we'll take a look at the ServiceNow tie-in. And so in this example, we've got our TF example. So what we did was we added a catalog item for our TF example app. And so this was an existing catalog item within the Morpheus platform that we're now exposing up to our ServiceNow instance. So that provides us with the visibility from a ServiceNow standpoint. And so certainly provides a really powerful capability in which as I mentioned, the inputs were passed up and the option list are being exposed from a ServiceNow standpoint. And so the need to do extensive coding from a ServiceNow standpoint has been eliminated from being able to create these dynamic catalog items. And so now that we know a bit about the ServiceNow integration and being able to expose that there, so that in many organizations, as I mentioned, ServiceNow is the request portal for all IT resources. And so that certainly provides a powerful capability. And so now that we've taken a look at that, let's start to decompose the catalog item from a Morpheus standpoint. So this would be whether the ServiceNow integration is being utilized or whether it's not. There's still the service catalog item from a Morpheus standpoint. And so if I come to provisioning catalog within the Morpheus platform, we see here TF example. And so we see the cost center, which is essentially the exact same thing that we saw from a ServiceNow standpoint. And so now let's take a look at the actual underpinnings of the catalog item itself. So if I come to blueprints, take a look at catalog item, we'll start to decompose this. And so if we take a look back at our diagram, we can see that we're at the catalog item. And now taking a look at how that's mapping to the other components. So catalog item has an input. We saw that the input was the cost center. Let's take a look at the catalog item to see the reference to the cost center. So TF example. And so we see that we've added our input here to be able to get access to the cost center option list or select list. And so in this case, we've got custom options and then the cost center, the actual name for the cost center item. And so one of the things that we've done is we've gone through the configuration wizard. It's an instant deployment, but one of the things of note is that the parameter has been injected here to our cost center. And so that's how the input from the user is being provided into the actual Terraform itself from a high level standpoint. We'll drill into how that all ties down into the actual Terraform code itself. But what we've done is injected it as a template parameter into our Terraform code. And so if we take a look at cost center as an option or input, so you see cost center, it is a select list. So the field name was F cost center. And so now we see that there is a select list of a type of select list. And now the option list that maps to the select list, which provides the drop-down functionality, is cost center. So in this case, it is a manual or static list. Certainly the platform provides capabilities such as being able to reference REST API endpoints, where this information could be dynamically pulled from an external system to be able to populate the values that the end user sees. Certainly also another option is to do something a little more complex, like referencing the user's group association or some metadata about the user pulled from Active Directory to make a decision. That information might be in Active Directory, might be somewhere else, but the logic can be facilitated to dynamically look that up based upon the user that's requesting the given catalog item. And so now if we take a look back at our diagram, so we've got our catalog item, we've got the input was our cost center. So the catalog item maps to an instance. So let's take a look at the actual catalog item itself and the mapping and how that works. So if we take a look at our TF example, so one of the things I mentioned was the configuration wizard. So for example purposes, I will walk through the full process to show how it actually works, but we'll come back to our previous example. So TF example 1. And one of the things I would do, so let me make sure that we saw it. So what I want to add is an instance. I could add a blueprint, I could add a workflow, but in this case, it's a Terraform instance type. So I want to add an instance. And so now I want to go to configuration wizard. And what that's going to do is present me with essentially the provisioning flow of how I would provision an instance in the more powerful UI aspect. But what this allows us to do is actually generate the content that was specified that we saw, which is the JSON payload in the previous example. So I have the existing instance. And so I'll click next. I'll specify the group, specify the environment. So these are essentially just going to be placeholders for the content. And so I'll specify cost center. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just specify replace me as my placeholder. Because what we're going to do is we're actually going to swap this out for our parameter or our input. So now it's going through the process of validating the instance. So what it's going to do is just ensure that the Terraform is valid and can actually be able to run a plan of that given operation. And so that's where we see the Terraform plan as part of the process. And so in this case, this is what would have happened is the cost center would have been replace me. But since we're not actually provisioning the resources, that's not what's going to be used. So in this case, I'll click complete. And what it's done is it's generated the JSON payload for me. So one of the things I can easily do is search, see if I can search replace me in the text. Chrome is failing me. All right, so let's scroll down. It is right here. So what I want to do is I want to replace this with our cost center input. And so at this point, I don't have the cost center input. So I'll add the cost center input here, and I will copy this and replace it with the string that said replace me. And so at this point, I've got the mapping from the service catalog or the catalog item from the input in the catalog item down to the instance. So the Terraform instance that we specified. And so now I've made that available as part of the functionality of the Terraform instance. And so I'll cancel that. So that's what we've done from the catalog item standpoint. So certainly, as I mentioned, we can get more complex in terms of the inputs that are added. I might want to add region. I might want to add a number of different inputs based upon what I'm deploying. But certainly that option is there. But we're going to stick with just the single input. And so let's take a look at our diagram once again. So we have looked at the catalog item. We've got the catalog item. We looked at adding the input into the catalog item, and it references our Terraform instance type. So when we went to select or run through the configuration wizard, we selected our Terraform instance type, which was TF example app. So in this case, let's now go to our instance type. So if we do a search, so we've got our TF example app instance type. So if we click edit, there's nothing particularly special about this. Right now, just specifying the name and the code. So now we've got a layout as well for our particular instance type. And so we have, once again, a name, a version, and the technology type is Terraform that we specified. And then a couple of other things that we have here. From a capability standpoint, I talked about the automation functionality. What Terraform instance types offer from a Morpheus standpoint is the ability to be able to associate the phase-based workflow capability with a particular Terraform instance type. And so now, in this particular case, I can run an Ansible playbook, a Python script, whatever automation I might want as part of the stand-up of these resources. In particular, being able to leverage something like Ansible to be able to install, let's say, software on one of the EC2 instances is extremely powerful. So in this case, I might select a given item to be able to associate with this particular instance. So let's say I might want to select my tech marketing MongoDB install playbook as part of the association of this workflow. One of the things that we do see here also is that there is a TFR secret associated with this particular instance type. So there is the ability to specify, in this case, it's specifying the AWS credentials. That could be specified here, or what we could do is a more scalable mechanism is be able to leverage what we term as Terraform profiles that are associated with a given cloud. So the reason I'm specifying the TFR secret here is because I am in our demo environment that is shared across our individuals at Morpheus. So from a design standpoint, this makes it a little bit easier for this environment. But in most environments, leveraging the Terraform profiles does provide a more scalable solution. And so what that actually enables us to do is avoid the tight coupling of credentials for a given instance type to a specific account. And so if we really evaluate that, what this would allow us to do is if I remove this from the instance type, then in theory, I could utilize the same instance type across multiple accounts. And when I go to deploy it into that cloud, referencing Morpheus clouds or clouds within the Morpheus, and I've associated credentials or information, metadata, to, let's say, do something like a role assume with a given cloud, then I don't have to worry about trying to duplicate this exact instance type 50 times because I got 50 accounts. No, I've got 50 accounts and I've added them as clouds into the Morpheus platform, and I'm using a single instance type that then references the credentials or the TF-bar secrets based upon which given Morpheus cloud they're going to be deployed into. So certainly something to consider as part of the self-service functionality and being able to deploy a given item into multiple Morpheus cloud integrations. So now that we've taken a look at that, let's take a look at spec templates. So we looked at specifying spec templates. In this case, I've actually diverged a little bit from our example in which I've specified all of the Terraform content in a single spec template. Certainly there's the capability where I could add multiple spec templates to this given item. Maybe I did want to break out what we had from a resourcing standpoint. So I might have the DynamoDB in one spec template and the EC2 instance in another spec template. So if we were referencing our diagram, I could have two spec templates that map into a single TF instance, and each of those spec templates could be backed by a Git integration. And so that's what we looked at when we specified or went through how the modules could be pulled in. And so certainly a capability there. But I've pared down the example just for simplicity purposes. So we've got our spec template here, but the same still applies. So let's take a walkthrough here. So instance type maps to the layout maps to the spec template. And so let's take a look at the spec template associated with this particular layout. So library, templates, spec template. So we have our AWS TF example app. So in this particular case, I'm using a local source. So certainly the platform provides the capability for it to be a repository and pull it in. So as an example, what I might have done was specified a repository for hosting my instantiations or my resources. So in this example, I might have had a general GitHub repository or GitLab repository, Git repository that had my applications. So I would have individual modules living in separate Git repositories, and then have essentially an instantiation repository that had, okay, example app includes a EC2 instance and a DynamoDB. And what I would do is I would have my Terraform code as the reference to those given modules, and then be able to leverage that. In this case, I've gone through the process and I'm not leveraging modules just for simplicity purposes. But the same would apply. So standard Terraform code here that we see here, one thing to note is the variable. Cost center is what we saw specified as our input. So we've mapped it in a couple of places, and ultimately this is where it starts to get to fully pass through the Terraform code. So we had the input or the option type, depending upon the version of Morpheus platform that you're using or are familiar with. So the input is what the user saw. The input was tied to a select list or an option list in the Morpheus platform. That was what simply exposed the selectable value. What happens when the value is selected is just that single value is passed, whether it's the 111 that we saw or the 222 that we saw. That then got passed into the Terraform instance type payload. So we saw our template parameter from a configuration standpoint. So that's where we copied and pasted the input into the JSON that we saw for our catalog item. That variable was exposed because we have a variable in our Terraform code that Morpheus was able to discover or extract, and that was this. So it was cost center that we saw. And so when we run the Terraform, the user specifies the input for the cost center that gets passed down into this variable. This variable is now being reused in the Terraform from a pure Terraform perspective. So this construct applies whether it's Terraform using Morpheus or just Terraform open source. So we specified the variable, and the variable's been used in a couple of different places. So common pattern is to use it for our tags. So let me blow up the screen. So var cost center is what we have here from an integration or capability standpoint. So var cost center, so which means variable, use the cost center. So that's going to define a tag for our EC2 instance. And in this case, we're also specifying the cost center for our DynamoDB. Certainly, we could do some variable injection on the name tag as well to ensure that we don't run into conflicts, and provides that self-service capability. So one of the things we could do is variabilize this to something like app name or deployment name, and then specify a variable further up from the Morpheus standpoint to inject that particular content as the name of our particular variable. So it could be honestly something like where we would do from a Terraform perspective, could be something like var.appName, and then we'd have a variable for app name, and then what it would do is it would be suffixed by our dash DynamoDB dash table. Also a common pattern, but certainly something that's more from the Terraform perspective, and just simply focus on being able to inject that down. And so now that we've taken a look at our content here, so we've got the spec template, so our Terraform code being pulled in, whether that's locally in this case, or as I mentioned, could be a Git repository to leverage that. And so that maps up to what we specified for our layouts. So if we're looking at bottom up order, so the spec template mapped up to the layout up to the instance type, and then the instance type was associated with a catalog item from a Morpheus platform standpoint. So that enables us to be able to create that self-service wrapper from a Morpheus standpoint around that given item. So certainly the platform provides the capability of where we could deploy the instance outside of the catalog item as well. So we could also specify it here where we want an RTF example, and it would walk through the same process that we saw with the configuration wizard and accept those given inputs from a capability or functional standpoint. And so once again, we have our cost center here. In this case, I don't have an input associated with the instance type, which is why we're seeing just the freeform text field for our cost center as opposed to the option list. So certainly something that could also be done here, but oftentimes I want to leverage the self-service catalog for more of that functionality to be able to associate with that a given workload. So at this point, I do have an existing instance or catalog item that's been provisioned already that we'll take a look at from a platform standpoint. So certainly some things that we see from a just interaction standpoint. So if we take a look at our state, we see the things like the spec templates associated with this particular instance. We see the plan that was ran. In this case, no infrastructure changes were detected. It was running a plan once again after the resources had already been provisioned as part of the workload. We said our cost center was populated. So one of the things I could do is I could say, you know what, I want to change the cost center for some reason. Certainly it could be a different value, but I could come in here and I could run through the process of updating that change for my given cost center, clicking next. And then it'll go through the process of validating the particular instance, and then it'll go through the process of running a plan against the particular Terraform instance. And so we see here from a Terraform perspective, we see that I changed the cost center from 22222 to 33333 as an example. And so I could then come and complete that. And so what it's going to do, so it was changed across both the EC2 instance as well as the DynamoDB. I can click complete, and it's going to go through the process and start applying the particular Terraform code to update those tags with the newly created cost center. So from a Morpheus standpoint, it's pretty easy to get started with leveraging Terraform within the platform in a self-service fashion. Certainly there is a number of areas where complexity can really be added from with the inputs and the select list and really bringing everything together. But at a high level, really the ability to be able to leverage the instance types to be able to compose the spec templates that we have that may be in Git repositories, may be added locally to the platform, but also be able to really leverage the self-service functionality of the Morpheus platform to create those catalog items and then be able to even expose those up into ServiceNow from an integration standpoint. So one of the ways to experience Morpheus for those that haven't had the chance to try it out themselves, or maybe you've got Morpheus and you want to use it in your own environment, your lab environment, your test environment at home. Morpheus Community Edition is a great way to get started. So MorpheusHub.com is where you would register for the Community Edition. Certainly one of the other ways to engage or interact with the Community Edition is also MorpheusData.com/community. And so you've got a question. Let's see. Is there a way to save a plan for later application, i.e. as part of change control processes for production environments? In this case, that's a great question. One of the ways to provide some of that functionality is to be able to associate an approval with a given instance type. So platform provides approval policies that can be associated at various levels. So I could come in, I would specify I might want an approval process for provision, or as well as potentially reconfigure. Could be done locally in the Morpheus platform, could be done via ServiceNow as an example. And so I could specify it at different places. So certainly an option to be able to potentially do it at the cloud level, do it for the groups, wherever fits, ideally. In this case, in production environment, you could specify if you want to deploy into a production cloud, so to speak, from a Morpheus standpoint, then the deployment and reconfiguration needs to go through an approval process to help align with some of those change control processes. Yeah, and so once the approval has been applied, or the workload has been approved, then it'll go through and deploy based upon what was then the request. So it's a great question. All right, so Community Edition, MorpheusHub.com or Morpheus Data/community is a great way to get started with Community Edition. Morpheus Community Forum is also another great place. So it's actually discuss.morpheusdata.com, not Morpheus Hub, as we see here. So it's discuss.morpheusdata.com. And then finally, for those that may have not experienced the Morpheus platform and don't currently own the Morpheus platform, certainly scheduling a demo with one of our SEs is a great way to delve into specifics about how the Morpheus platform can provide functionality for your organization, whether it's Terraform or a number of the other capabilities that the Morpheus platform provides. I appreciate everyone for joining the session, and certainly thank you for your time.